if you're ugly, don't get arrested in Pennsylvania. You see, a few years ago, they got a group of people together and had them look at the pictures of 74 different criminal defendants who eventually got convicted of the crimes that they were charged with. And as those people looked at those pictures, they were asked to rate each person as to whether they had an attractive appearance or an unattractive appearance. And what they found was that those criminals who were rated as being unattractive were twice as likely to be sent to prison, while those who were considered to be attractive generally got off with a lighter sentence, such as probation or community service. I guess what that study means is that if you're ugly, don't rob a bank. Or recently, I heard about a fellow who joined one of those mega churches, one of those congregations where thousands and thousands of people gather each Sunday. And after he had attended there for a few months, he volunteered to be an usher to help show people to their seats. But after he had been an usher for a couple of weeks, the head usher took him aside and told him he wasn't doing it right. What he was supposed to be doing, the head usher said, was making sure that the more pleasant-looking people were seated down in the front rows. You see, that church televised their worship service to the local area. And the minister was in the habit of, during the sermon, of leaving the pulpit and roaming around down near the front pews. And so the ushers were instructed to make sure that the good-looking people were seated in those seats because they were the most likely ones to be seen on TV. I imagine that some of you are looking around right now and thinking, boy, if we ever start televising our worship services, the back of the sanctuary is going to get even more crowded than it already is. You shouldn't judge people based on their appearance. Our parents told us that. Even God told us that here in this story in the Bible. But the reality, at least for most of us, is that that is what we do. In fact, some scientists say that when we see someone within 1/10 of 1 second, we begin to make judgments. Within 1/10 of 1 second, we begin to make judgments about whether we like that person or not, or whether we think that person is trustworthy or not, or whether we want to be around that person or not. But even though that is the way that we so often operate, according to this story here in 1 Samuel, that is not the way that God operates. You see, according to this story that we listened to today, the people of Israel had a problem. They had a big problem. Their very first king, King Saul, was not working out. And God had decided that King Saul needed to be dethroned and thrown out of office. But the problem was, who then was going to take over in his place? After all, there was no vice king in the wings waiting to step in. But God had a solution for that problem. And God's solution was to tell Samuel, the main religious leader in Israel at that time, to go to Bethlehem and to find a man by the name of Jesse. And God said that God would then tell Samuel which of Jesse's sons God had chosen to be the new king of Israel. And so when Samuel Bethlehem, he found Jesse, and right away Jesse brought in his oldest son. And when Samuel saw him, immediately Samuel made a judgment and said, "This must be the one. Look at how tall and strong and handsome he is. He looks like a king." But God said, "Samuel, you might judge people based on their appearance, but I don't. This isn't the one that I have chosen." And so Jesse brought in his second oldest son, and again, right away, Samuel made a judgment and said, "This must be the one. He really looks like a king." But again, God said, "Samuel, I told you, I do not judge based on appearance. This is not the one that I have chosen." And that same scene got repeated 5 more times. 5 more times Jesse brought in his other sons, but each time God said, "This is not the one that I have chosen." So finally, Samuel said to Jesse, "You've shown me 7 of your sons, and God hasn't chosen any of them to be the next king of Israel. Do you have any more sons?" Jesse replied, "Well, I have one more, but you couldn't possibly be interested in him. He's too young to be a king. He's the youngest of all my sons, and he's had no special training that would make him fit to be a king. All he's ever done in life is watch my sheep for me." But Samuel said, "Bring him here anyway." And as soon as Jesse's youngest son, David, walked into the room, God said, "This is the one. He will be the next king of Israel." And immediately Samuel took the olive oil that he had with him and anointed David. He poured the olive oil on David's head, and right away God's Spirit came upon David in a mighty and wonderful way. And in time, David went on to become the next